You know what? Something popped up in Twitter the other day, and I don't know where Twitter gets ideas. I mean, I guess it's just crowdsourcing ideas. It's like the internet. It's just pinging around ideas. That's why I call it the taco sphere. It's just like this big crunchy roll of filling. And sometimes you're running into whipped cream or guacamole or like various layers of vegetable and meat. And you don't know what is splashing from one place to another. But this phrase came up that accused certain people, I think it was Quillette, but then a bunch of other writers and stuff and people that I've been like interviewing and reading about and trying to get onto my channel so that we can have an exchange of ideas. But a list of people on Twitter were called alt-right adjacent. And that was very fascinating that now instead of just accusing your opponents of being Nazis or alt-right, you interject this patina of subtlety and call them alt-right adjacent. It's like this neighborhood affiliation. Like you're not exactly associated with them, but you're closer than not associated to them anymore. And so it's still the accusation, it's still blatantly guilt by association, but what it actually does, and I don't think the people who are doing this are kind of like, you know, progressive trolls or people who go around like really just ranting about Jordan Peterson and all these writers that are centrist or not super progressive. They're still practicing this basically this othering, this hyper-othering, but alt-right adjacent basically puts all of political discourse or political positionality, let's call it, on a continuum. So that goes back into what the progressives are doing when they're hyper-othering all these other groups. And furthermore, it goes back to certain problems with the progressives, such as white privilege or the intersectional hierarchy or the progressive stack. My problem with that is that where is the calculation to say who is exactly what or how far is too far in either direction? And so I don't think privilege, I don't think oppression necessarily can be broken down into something that's explicitly calculated. Nobody can actually do that. Nobody has the power to do that. Not on a societal level, least of all within human interaction, direct human interaction. So I think that the whole project of anti-oppression or whatever it is that uses privilege or white fragility, etc., I think all that stuff can just be reduced down to first principles, which would be respect, recognition, humility, patience, attempting to understand the other person instead of putting them in a box. But still, the problem with adjacentism, or if you're alt-right adjacent, like, well, what if you're on the other side of the person who's next to alt-right, and what if you're 3 people away from the alt-right? Well, what if you're 1,000,000 people away from the alt-right? So eventually, the progressive is alt-right adjacent through all these different means, and they're just using these rhetorical othering tactics, this tribalism, to distance themselves from the alt-right, and actually to put people between them and the alt-right. Well, I could probably hit you just as hard as the alt-right because you're that far away from me. You deserve my gunfire. You deserve my trebuchet of rhetorical attacks. Then I stumbled on this Twitter thread by Jeff Stoner, who is a fictionist of the science fiction variety. So I'm just going to read through this and comment on it as we do so. This is Jeff Stoner speaking. I now realize why liberals believe that everyone to right of Stalin is an actual Nazi. They think the right is intersectional. The left is intersectional. If you support a liberal cause, you must support every adjacent cause. Those who don't are driven out. Liberal activists jostle to get their pet causes adjacent to the most popular, protected, well-funded causes. To wit, in order to be a good feminist, one must also be a trans ally, an environmentalist, a BLM ally, etc. This is how we got pro-abortion evangelicals. They have to toe the feminist line or lose their cred with the minorities. Intersectionalism deranges institutions. Now, this is something that I was thinking about over a year ago when I was still at Evergreen. At Evergreen, there's a lot of tribal, like, not in the bad, not in the polemic sense, but actual Native American tribe people there and interacting with the place. And what I saw happening was intersectionality creep in and basically go and support the tribal community or the tribal issues, but also forced the tribes themselves to adopt every other stance of the progressive movement. So you automatically have to embrace trans rights, or not even trans rights itself, not rights itself, but the ideology behind trans rights activism. You have to embrace postmodernism. You have to embrace feminism. If you want their help, you also have to be a good ally in your turn. So who exactly is benefiting when everybody has to agree with everybody else? And the problem is that intersectionality attenuated to certain basic principles that they can support people who disagree? I'm sure they do, but what we see emerge time and time again is that the same tactics that they use against the alt-right and the alt-right adjacent, they end up using against each other. To continue with the thread. But here's the thing. Leftists assume that the right-wingers do this too. They imagine that the KKK is adjacent to gun rights, or that Hitler is at the intersection of small government and pro-life. Hitler was a vegetarian, after all. Conservatives laugh out loud at this, but liberals are dead serious about it. This led them to conflate the grandmas and grandpas of the Tea Party with the skinheads of Aryan nations. It concealed the reason Trump won from them, hint, it's not racism. It causes them to attack free speech, one of the foundation blocks of liberty. But the right isn't intersectional. Some elements on the extreme right are, but they are a tiny minority. This goes back to what I brought up about the Facebook monoculture video that I posted a few days ago, where I said that there's a lot of these so-called ethno-nationalist or nationalist uprisings. And I brought up that point because I was wondering why people think that that's such a troublesome, problematic occurrence. But when it comes down to it, it's a very tiny minority of people who are on the right who are pushing for ethnocentrism. What people are doing on the right is more akin to conservatism. It's more akin to basic patriotism than it is to any one fascist identicality of positionality, to use some postmodern frameworks in there. Jeff Stoner is bringing up the fact that the liberals are attacking all the people on the right over and over and over again because they're projecting their way of viewing the world onto the right. So I wonder how he's going to make sense of what the right is as opposed to intersectional. To continue, a conservative can be staunchly pro-life, but think that the Klan is vile. It seems bizarre to have to explain this, but liberals not only won't get it, they'll disbelieve it. But here's the rub. Right-wing intersectionalism may not exist yet, but it could. Intersectionality is a cynical but effective movement born out of powerlessness and minority status. I don't think so. I think that intersectionality was born out of the privilege of being highly educated and highly left-leaning to begin with, and being coddled within academic institutions, not realizing that it all runs on capitalism, and being in this safe bubble where you think that your communist ideals can thrive within a bureaucracy because you happen to be one of the people who can. The only reason that any of these big corporations, these big institutions, can implement affirmative action is because they've already been successful enough to put their money into these programs. They can spend the money into these programs. And I wonder if it's true or not, please push back against me, that the leftist ideology tends to spend money rather than create. It assumes that people will automatically, without selfish interest, build the best thing possible or maximize value. And I don't think it necessarily does. But to get back to the Twitter thread, intersectionality is a cynical but effective movement born out of powerlessness and minority status. Actually, okay, I think it actually uses powerlessness and minority status to gain majority status and power. That's what I think. To continue, leftist activists of the last century aligned in order to achieve their goals. They succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. The left controls almost all institutions: government, save briefly the executive branch, the media, education, entertainment, big business, and maddeningly now the church. They won. But nothing is forever, and the right has woken up. Which is why you got Trump, by the way. The right-wing resistance is still organizing. I don't know where he's going with this. I should have read the whole thing. We'll see where he's going with this. Having reached the limits of the strategies that elected Trump and having their speech and assembly curtailed by the above-mentioned institutions, they are searching for alternatives. Intersectionality will be very appealing. Now, I really think that that's a little cynical. I think that center-left, center-right are banding together. That's why we have this IDW movement. That's why we have this whole, Jordan Peterson and then the Evergreen thing and then all these people intersecting outside of these institutions. People basically getting off work, coming home, and then communicating with each other outside of these institutions. I think it's not necessarily banding together into an institution itself. It's more of a movement, and that movement will have a sliding scale of people who are more interested in ideas, people who are more interested in, let's say, passion or activism. People with a wide variety of not accepted ideas are going to get out there, or even patterns of behavior are going to come together. They are coming together and banding together. So I don't know if it's necessarily a resistance, so-called. I have a problem with resistance because it ends up adulating subconsciously that which it is resisting against. If I went after Evergreen too hard, and I do this sometimes, I watch myself going after feminism, going after a lot of these progressive movements a little too hard and actually giving them more power than they actually deserve. Because ultimately, different ways of interacting with ideas, with progress, are far more interesting than the Marxist oppression narrative, the victim narrative. I think bureaucratic socialism will be just as corrupt as bureaucratic capitalism, but at least with bureaucratic capitalism, there seems to be a little bit more input for information to cycle through that and to limit corruption. Corruption is going to be in every system, and I think I see a lot of people on the left wanting to overthrow capitalism, thinking that socialism will be better than capitalism. I think it'll be worse because it doesn't have certain checks and balances inherent in it, because, of course, everything is centralized, and that central power gets power, wants more power, wants to maintain power, and will be just like, Amazon, will be just like any of these institutions that we already rail against. That is a side thing that I might cut because I'm just rambling. It's Sunday. To get back to Jeff Stoner, intersectionality will be very appealing to the right. This is how you get real Nazis, by the way. Nazis with loads of money, gun, land, and skills. Nobody wants this. What's the solution? I don't have one, but abandoning and forever renouncing intersectionality will be very, very wise for all involved. Don't think so? Spend a few days reading about the Weimar Republic and get back to me. So unfortunately, this is where it breaks down for me because I don't know exactly what intersectionality is that he's critiquing. Intersectionality, I don't think has any solutions. I think it does have a basic insight that we can take, but it doesn't go beyond that insight. What it ends up doing is just tearing down and critiquing and critiquing and critiquing and critiquing and critiquing. But the thing is, like, I'm not going to renounce critiquing in its own right. I'm not going to renounce going after ideas and pulling them apart. I will try to renounce acting in an ungentlemanly way, or to be proper, an ungentlemanly way, and try to treat my opponents with respect and try to see where I am slipping into ad hominem and go by association and let go of the tactics that end up being used of othering people and then othering people who are close to them and then othering people who are close to the people who are close to them until I've completely othered and alienated myself from everybody else, which is the problem. I wonder if that's what he means by intersectionality. So intersectionality on one level is a view of complexity, but on another level, it's a collapsing of that complexity into a very simplistic formula of power relationships that's never able to actually be employed in any productive manner because it can't do the calculations of seeing exactly how easy or difficult everybody has in relation to everybody else. Hence, just break it down into first principles. We all have it bad. Some have it worse than others. It's the responsibility of those who are strong to help the weak, of those who are smart to help the stupid, of those who are abled to help the disabled. But that responsibility, if it's going to be authentic, needs to come from within. The strong needs to learn how to apply their strength to help the weak. And, in a capitalist society, I think, please show me how wrong I am. I think that a capitalist society actually rewards the strong for helping the weak, rewards the well-off for helping the under-well-off. It rewards people who are smart when they interact with people who are not as smart by giving them tools to make their lives better, quicker, faster, smarter, etc. So I think that the incentivization of responsibility for each other is the true system that we could get towards. And I think that that system has to have a moral level and then kind of basically an economic level and probably a basic, governmental level or a policy level. But I can't break all those down. Final thought. This is Jeff Stoner. Final thought. Intersectionality is actually the inverse of principle. Well, that's what I was just thinking about. If you're intersectional, you're a puppet. And your master CSN make you do anything. Your master can make you do anything, even compromise your core beliefs. This is why I say that liberals will be pro-child sex within 10 years. That's a pretty strong statement. There's probably just as many pedophiles as there are Nazis, or there's just as many people who are using intersectionality and queer theory to get accepted as pedophiles as there are people who are using, conservative outlets to enforce their ethno-national supremacy, unless you go from the left and say, well, it's all supremacy anyways, which is another tactic that just breaks everything down and completely alienates you from people who don't want that which is actually fascist and actually violent and actually racist. Anyway, yes, you will. Your principles matter not at all. Your allies decide your morals for you. Takeaway, don't be intersectional ever unless you want Nazis. Finis. Now, I want to break down this last little statement. Your principles matter not at all. Your allies decide your morals for you. And I think that that is just a basic functionality of working in any group. I see there is an emergent criticism of the intellectual dark web that does have a possibility of coming true. I mean, it's a lot of people that criticize this are projecting, but one of the things that might make it true is that they are all going to act in self-interest to protect their money, to protect their status, so they're not going to really go after each other. They're going to end up apologizing for each other. How are they going to keep each other accountable? And I think that I was talking to the people that showed up to the moderate meetup last night, and one person said that what it needs to do is basically, it has a very steep hierarchy right now. Probably you can say Jordan Peterson's on top, and there's a steep hierarchy, and what each member of this hierarchy needs to do is connect and speak with people and spread it out and spread it out and spread it out, and having more and more conversations of a certain caliber with more and more people, and basically make it so robust with voices that it can police itself, or it can self-adjust, whatever that movement is, can self-adjust. Maybe there's a fine line to walk between apologizing for somebody or allowing them to be wrong and then seeing how they were wrong or seeing how they made a misstep, filling in the good intention of that, but also seeing the bad part of that. And I see that there will be a tendency in any group to protect itself. And that's the problem with having an IDW. And the only way I think to stop it from becoming insular and stultified. It's going to be stultified anyways, because that's just how things work. But one way of spreading that out is to disband it by bringing more and more and more and more people in, making it more and more inclusive. And the barrier for entry should be a certain level of articulation and a certain ability to listen and respond, right? So there's basically, it breaks down into not just free speech, but intelligent speech. We're seeking after intelligent dialogue. We're seeking after a centrism that doesn't sit on the fence so much as find its value in the interplay of ideas, not in ideas or positions themselves, but the tensions between ideas, and see what bringing those ideas or those positions together can yield that's new and fruitful, and always pursuing the fruitful path. That would be the centrism that I would like to promote or be a part of, or probably just slaughter the word centrist by making it mean something completely else. But such is language, such are words. Don't be adjacent to anything that, well, we're all adjacent to something. This is a mad, mad world. We're all connected, aren't we? In this wonderful World Wide Web.
They're calling to their friends.
I don't see any babies. Oh, there's a couple.